you. So as mentioned, my name is Stefanie Tignor, and I'm a people scientist at a company called Humu. And at Humu, we're leveraging the power of small behavioral changes to create radical organizational transformations from the inside out and from the bottom up. So the world of work is becoming more and more complex. With the increasing prevalence of global organizations, we're facing new, never-before-seen practical challenges, such as when can I schedule this Skype meeting at a time when everyone will be awake, as well as cultural ones. What does it mean to be a great manager across cultures and across countries? And so with this increasing complexity, with all of these signals moving and transforming globally like this, how can we as people analysts ensure that we're actively and accurately assessing signal and separating signal from noise in our people data? And if we find a signal that says something culturally has to change within this organization, how can we effectively drive change in such a complex system? How can we be sure that the right people are working on the right things at the right times, together yet separately? So at Humu, we spend a lot of time thinking about this because we're on a mission to make work better for everyone, everywhere. And over the past couple of years, we've discovered that the best way to do this is to build complexity to deliver simplicity. And I'll walk you through exactly what that means. So any psychologist will tell you that if you want to change behavior, you have to make it as easy as possible for people to follow through. And at Humu, that's what we're ultimately interested in. We're ultimately interested in changing people's behavior at work for the better. But in order to do that, all of those efforts will be for naught unless you know what you actually need to change, unless you're parsing through these complex signals and understanding what needs to change within the organization and assessing what really, really matters. So in order to do that, you're going to have to get complex. To show you exactly why this is so important, here's an example of just one sample trajectory of a typical employee at your typical organization. So each employee within your organization has their own unique history and journey and life cycle throughout their organizational tenure. This starts when they apply to your organization, then they consider joining, they eventually join, maybe they go through a perf cycle or two, they've just missed promotion in this example timeline, so maybe they've considered leaving, they've entertained other options, and then ultimately they decided, nope, I'm gonna stay, and then their workload increased just enough for them to get fed up and they end up leaving. But it's important to remember that it's not just these individual trajectory events that affect an individual's experience at your organization. There are also myriad social and contextual influences that are operating 24/7 and influencing their feelings as well. Some examples are like a new CEO joins, maybe their team size grows, maybe just as they missed that promotion, their social connection got promoted. That can amplify that effect. Then consider the fact that no matter what type of organization you have, whether it's 50 people or 50,000, every individual within your organization is having their own unique trajectory and history that's constantly updating, and they're all interacting with each other. That can get really complex really fast. So most of us in HR are used to measuring the reality part of this equation. We're used to measuring things like salary increases, base salaries, promotions, performance ratings. We likely all record that. Many of us also record perceptions. So we look at how people perceive these events, maybe through things like engagement surveys. But where this starts to become really interesting is when we look at the gap between those perceptions and realities, and in tandem, look at historical and contextual effects that are also interacting with those effects. And so when we get to the center, this really messy web where everything is connecting and everything is interacting, that's where we get the most accurate predictions in our people data, but it's also the most complicated. So at Humu, we're dealing with this a lot, and we're intentionally building systems that can get at that complex, messy little web right in the center there. And I'll give you some examples from real data that we've found about how when you look at these complex signals and integrate this information together, you get much more effective predictions. So it should come as a surprise to no one here that if you dislike your manager, you're more likely to leave an organization. That's not surprising. We found that. Probably you found that in your data as well if you have that information. But that's just taking into account that personal perceptual part of the equation. What if we marry that with social context? Because we know that for most individuals, they don't just have a single relationship with their manager one-on-one. Most individuals who have a manager also have a team of other people who report to that manager. And so we wanted to see what that context had, what type of influence it had on the individual's behavior on those teams. So in our data, we took two groups of people. Both groups of people dislike their manager, as highlighted in the red there. The person on the left dislikes their manager, but they're the only one in their group. Everyone else on their team likes their manager consistently. The person on the right dislikes their manager, and everyone on their team agrees. We found, to our surprise, that people on the right in these situations were actually 12% more likely to stay at their organizations as compared to the individuals on the left. And that was really surprising to us, because if you just look at this information, the person on the right looks like they're in a far worse situation. They have a universally disliked manager. Everyone agrees. However, we came to discover when combining this social contextual information that these people on the right actually just feel more social support. Sure, they dislike their manager, but the fact that everyone agrees actually is a benefit to them because they see some validation in their feelings. They're not like this person on the left who's all on their own. I'll give you another example, this time marrying the perceptual with the historical. So we were interested to see how people's feelings about their managers evolve and change over time. So we asked people, how likely are you to recommend your manager? Then 6 months later, we asked them the same question. These two bars should be no surprise at all. These are people who did not change managers. So the bar on the left is people who disliked their manager 6 months ago. We asked them again 6 months later. They still dislike their manager. This person on the right, those are the people who said, I liked my manager 6 months ago. We asked them 6 months later. They still like their manager. Where this gets really interesting is when we look at people who changed managers in that 6-month period. So these people on the middle, on the whole, changed in between those 6 months. And what we found, first of all, was a main effect of changing manager, such that if you change managers, you do experience some change. So that's good news for everyone in the room who maybe has a manager that they've disliked. That doesn't mean, what that says is that it means that if you are disliking your manager today, you are not destined to dislike every manager you ever have for the rest of your life. So that's very good news. But what becomes really interesting about this is when we look at the people who changed managers, who disliked their manager 6 months ago, and who liked their manager 6 months ago. Those two middle bars are statistically different from one another. It's a small effect, but we see this consistent small carryover effect such that if you disliked your manager 6 months ago, even if you changed managers, the negative baggage of that relationship carries over into your new relationship with your manager. And so again, that's the power of combining this perceptual with this historical. If we were just looking at one point in time, we would miss this effect. So that's getting at the complexity, but as I mentioned, at Humu, we're really interested in changing behavior. And if you want to change behavior, you have to get simple because simplicity supports follow through. And that's what I love about this, and what's actually so ironic is that at Humu, our most complex analyses, our users never even see. We keep them hidden because when we want to motivate real people to make real cultural change within an organization, we confront them with simplicity because simplicity supports follow through. So I probably don't need to go through the definition of a nudge for most people in this room, but in case anyone does not know, a nudge is an aspect of the choice architecture that makes people's behavior, modifies it in predictable ways. And importantly, it doesn't forbid choice. So it's a little shove to sort of say, we can get you to do the thing that's most adaptive, but not removing the choice completely. And at Humu, we're using nudges to change people's behavior all over the organization from a grassroots level. I'll also note that we don't just nudge individuals on the behavior that they need to change. Because if we just nudged people, hey, you need to speak up more, we notice you're not speaking up enough, here, speak up more, and we do that without modifying the context in which they exist in the organization, then we're putting all the onus on that one individual, and they're really fighting an uphill battle. They're ready to change, but the environment around them is not willing to change. So that's the reason why we don't just nudge individuals, but we also nudge in a complementary way, such that if we're going to nudge one person to speak up, we also nudge others to be more effective listeners, such that we're lifting up that behavior and then paving the way around them as well. So I'm going to give you some examples and again some real data about how effectively nudges have driven behavior at organizations that we've worked with. So Humu offers a diagnostic survey. And one of the most important things that a manager can do following a diagnostic survey is discuss the results with their team. But a lot of managers are really reluctant to do this. It can be maybe a scary experience, particularly if their results aren't that great. So we really want to nudge them to encourage to enact this behavior. So this is a sample of one of the nudges that we send to managers shortly after the survey has been released. We just remind them, hey, we sent you your survey results. Why don't you share the results with your team? And not only that, we've made it as pain-free as possible because we put a link in this email that comes with a pre-populated calendar invite that allows you to just click it and schedule this conversation. And we've also given you a guide for having this conversation so you know how to talk about this in an effective way. So again, removing the barriers and making it as easy as possible for people to do the right thing and the most adaptive thing in their organizations. So after sending this nudge, we then ask employees, hey, did your manager have that conversation with you? And we've found that employees of managers who got this nudge, as compared to managers who did not get the nudge, are 2.5 times more likely to have this conversation. So these nudges really inspire action. Not only do the nudges inspire action, we've also found some exciting results regarding personalization. So on the left here are people who got what we call a generic report. And this is a report on this survey about just in general, how is the organization feeling? And that's all they have access to. People on the right received a personalized report. So it wasn't just the organizational information, but it was also, here's some information about your team specifically and what you can do, and here's what is unique about your situation. People who got the personalized report were 20% more likely to share the results and have that conversation as compared to people who had the generic report. So nudges inspire action, and personalization amplifies those effects. Now, by now you may be thinking, it is just one conversation about survey results. So why would you spend so much time trying to engage people in these conversations and support these conversations? Well, we've found that these conversations have really important implications both for the manager and for how that individual employee who had this conversation sees the organization as a whole. We found that if an employee has a conversation with their manager about survey results, just this one conversation, there's 64% greater agreement that their manager is committed to change. Not only that, but these positive effects radiate outward, such that if my manager had this conversation with me, I not only see my manager as more committed to change, I come to see my organization as a whole as 27% more committed to change. So just having these small interactions and making these small tweaks on the local level may not seem that important, but when you change that behavior on the local level with someone's manager, not only are there implications for the managerial relationship, there are also implications for how I come to see my organization, including my CEO, as a whole. So those are nudges in the moment, those one-on-one conversations, but we also want to look at how these things add up. Because we're all about small behavioral changes. So we're trying to change conversations in the moment, maybe have a more effective meeting here, a better one-on-one there, and so on. But how does this all escalate over time? So I'd like to show you some real data from organizations working on growth goals. So first, we'll look at people who did not take action on any of the nudges, and this is over 6 months. We then compare people's scores on their growth goals 6 months ago to today. And you see if no one took action, if neither me nor my manager took action as the result of these nudges, we saw a decline. And I want to pause here to underscore this because this really highlights something very important and a common misconception, which is that a lot of people think that if you change nothing and there is an organizational problem, that the default state is no change. So if I do nothing about this problem, it's just going to stay the same. But that's not true. We've seen in all of our data time and time again that organizations who do nothing about cultural problems, those problems don't stay the same. If only, that would be wonderful. They fester and they get worse and they downward spiral over time. So the default is not no change, the default is decline over time. We then compared that to people who one person took action. So I took action or my manager took action over the course of these 6 months, and we see no change. But again, no change is a good thing here because the default state is decline. Finally, when both me and my manager take action, that's when we see the most powerful results. That's when we see powerful increases in sentiment regarding these growth goals. So again, just these little tweaks in behavior over the course of 6 months start to add up, and the effects are most pronounced when more people take action and when more people take action together. That's not all. So we've built this system based on the assumption that most people will not take action. So this is the difference between using nudges within your organization and using something like trainings and developments. Whereas in the case of trainings and developments and these typical large-scale organizational programs, everyone really has to get on board and be engaged and follow through on the items. With nudges, the efforts can start really small. And we've found that there's this tipping point at just about 27% of the organization. If 27% of the organization just looks at these nudges, doesn't even necessarily have to do anything, but just looks at them, that's enough critical mass to start a cultural change throughout the organization. So I'd like to close by just reiterating that the world of work is becoming more and more complex. We have these increasingly global systems. We have complex organizations, people using technology in different ways. And so if in that data we're starting to see signal that something needs to be changed, it can be difficult to enact that change in a unified and systematic way. But by looking at the signals that matter, getting really complex, and then deducing that complexity to simplicity and delivering that simplicity to your employees, you can create unified change and get everyone moving together. Thank you.